portfolio is going to be directed towards collegiate athletes, and it has been titled The PhysioFlux Fuel for Thought. Now, I'd like to draw your attention to this title, which is Insulin and Glucagon, a Balancing Act. These are the two primary hormones which work to regulate our blood sugar. If you look over here on the left, you'll see that there are two stimuli involved in this regulation, and it's going to kind of go like a figure 8 loop. So stimuli 1 is going to be in the fed state. So after you eat a meal, your blood sugar is going to increase because you're going to have consumed some glucose. This signal is going to travel to this portion of the brain called the hypothalamus. What the hypothalamus is going to do, it is going to tell the pancreatic beta cells to release insulin. Now, this is the primary hormone that works to allow glucose to enter into the cell. And with this, these GLUT4 receptors are going to rise to the surface of the cell and glucose will enter in. And subsequently, blood glucose concentration will decrease and we are back to homeostasis. So now if we look at the bottom half of this loop, this is the fasted state. And this is a stimulus involved with being fasted, you haven't eaten food, or during a workout. The same signal is going to travel to the hypothalamus, which is going to go to the pancreatic alpha cells to release glucagon, which tells the liver to release glycogen, which is stored glucose, and that will increase our blood sugar and get us back to homeostasis. So this is an important concept for athletes to understand, just to know the regulation between fasting, between meals, and eating a healthy diet to maintain a lean composition and, just the fuel flux for that. So moving on, we are going to talk about fat digestion. Triple F, flavor-filled foods. So this pathway is to encourage athletes to know that a high-fat diet is not bad when it is in the absence, when carbs are taken out. Not a ton, not all carbs, but a good amount. What's going to happen here with this fuel flux is we are going to have a decrease in blood glucose concentration. And what happens here when we have a lower blood sugar is these adipocytes, our adipose tissue, we're going to have an increased expression of these receptors. So what happens here is this hormone-sensitive lipase comes in, and it allows these fatty acids right here to be pulled from the adipocytes and to go into an albumin carrier into the bloodstream. So with that, we see this fat carrier over here. These fat carriers transport triglycerides, cholesterol all over the body, and here it is going to be processed and it turns into this chylomicron remnant after it has been processed through. This remnant goes to the liver and it can be synthesized and packaged into a VLDL, which is a very low density lipoprotein. However, when an individual is in a state where they are in low glucose, like I said, there's going to be an upregulation of these receptors, and there's going to be a decreased concentration of glucose in the blood, and these albumin carriers that have the fatty acids are going to go feed the muscle tissue and the heart to help promote fat burning and also promote a lean and toned body, which is what we want as athletes, so that we can increase the performance in that area. This will also prevent a sugar crash. So fat generates a lot more ATP than glucose, and we want the carbohydrate intake to be lessened so that these chylomicrons, and ultimately this chylomicron remnant can be decreased. So moving forward, kind of going off of the chylomicron idea is this cholesterol. So there's good and bad. So kind of talking about the synthesis of cholesterol. So most of it is synthesized in the liver, but 20% comes from the food we eat. So a lot of people know that eggs contain a lot of cholesterol. Now, this cholesterol is going to travel into the bloodstream. These are a couple cholesterol molecules. And what they do is they combine to form a lipoprotein. And that is what I touched on in the earlier pathway. So as we move down this process, we see that there are different types of lipoprotein carriers. Over here we have LDL, which is typically known as the bad cholesterol because it contains a lot of cholesterol and it can slip behind arterial walls and cause plaque buildup, hypertension, and a lot of different issues. And this happens when glucose is in high concentration in the blood, and those lipoprotein or the glucose gets synthesized into fat, and this LDL becomes oxidized, and that's where we get issues in the bloodstream. So what happens here, so the chylomicron is the buildup of the cholesterol. And what it does is it travels through the intestine and the blood to the liver. And this is the packaging center where it gets processed into different carriers. Now, over here on my right, you'll see an enzyme called lipoprotein lipase. And this enzyme comes in, it breaks down the LDL, and it allows this LDL to go towards the LDL receptors, which can go towards the synthesis of bile and hormones and lots of good stuff. So that is what we want to see. In addition to that, HDL is the good cholesterol, which picks up excess cholesterol and brings it to the liver for excretion. And we want to regulate this pathway. And we can do this by fasting between meals and eating a higher fat diet with low carb. So kind of again tying off of the chylomicron metabolism, they're really cool carriers, I titled it, because they go and they do a lot of things for our body. So what happens here is we eat some dietary fat. It travels through the thoracic duct and goes to the jugular vein, and here we have the formation of the chylomicron. So in a fed state, we are going to have an increased expression of this lipoprotein lipase, which is going to act in the liver and form LDL. And then we want to get to the postprandial state so that, again, like I said before, the LDL receptors can be upregulated and we have the synthesis of bile and hormones. In a fasted state, we see this alternative hormone called hormone-sensitive lipase that I mentioned in a previous diagram, and it's going to act on the triglyceride. And what it's going to do is it is going to break it down into the glycerol backbone and the monoglyceride and free fatty acids. So the fatty acid can go to the adipocyte to be stored, and then we can also have beta oxidation happen, which is going to happen in the postprandial state to generate ATP, burn fat. This is a really good pathway for athletes to be in, but we want to be flexing between these states so that we are healthy and metabolically flexible, don't have too much glucose in the system, and ultimately just promoting a lean and toned body. Here we have the sorbitol pathway, and I titled this the glucose gutter because this pathway is activated when there is a lot of glucose that needs to be processed. So up here on my left, you'll see a glucose molecule. It's got 6 units, and what happens here is we have this enzyme aldose reductase, which it comes in and it forms the sorbitol molecule. Now, when this molecule is in high concentration, this enzyme that's supposed to break it down into another molecule, there is a decreased expression of it, and we can't get to fructose. And this is where we have a lot of problems that can occur, such as osmotic stress, diabetic retinopathy, diabetic neuropathy, and diabetic nephropathy and neuropathy. And these are things we want to avoid. We can do this by regulating our glucose intake because ultimately these series of reactions can get us to an end product, which is fructose, which will finish its journey in the liver. And if you haven't heard a lot about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, this occurs when the mitochondria get damaged because there's so much glucose to be processed. And this is the main powerhouse or the main center where lots of physiological processes occur. So this is why it's so important to make sure that we're regulating our glucose intake, fasting between meals, and just being aware of those nutrients that we're consuming. So yes, this fructose contains unregulated enzymatic activity, meaning that it goes straight to the liver. This is going to increase our VLDL, increase the cholesterol. There's a higher chance of those LDL slipping behind arterial walls, causing plaque buildup, and really causing a lot of health issues there. So this pathway needs to be regulated in a fasted and a fed state, going back to that initial loop at the beginning of the pathway. I would like to end this pathway by talking about ketone synthesis. Can't really get to my bottom portion, but I will just begin by talking about how this is a triglyceride molecule. So ketone synthesis, I titled it high-powered brain batteries. So what happens here is we have glucose, or glucagon and epinephrine are hormones that are activated in a fasted state. What they're going to do is they are going to help to break down the triglyceride into free fatty acids and a glycerol backbone. These free fatty acids then travel on a albumin carrier in the bloodstream, and when there is a high accumulation of these free fatty acids in the bloodstream, it goes to make a ketone body. Ketones can also be formed with a supplement known as MCT oil, which is just basically a high-powered form of coconut oil, a bit different, but some people take it and put it in their coffee. And it goes to the brain and it allows for good physiological processing because the brain needs glucose, but these ketones here, we can make brain power in the absence of glucose, and this will help us burn fat and promote a lean and toned body. Now, this glycerol backbone goes to the liver to the formation of new glucose, and again, that glucose can go to the brain and power us. So overall, these pathways connect and they allow an individual, you being a college athlete, to understand the importance of flexing between meals, or flexing between fuels, fasting between meals, so that you're able to tap into your fat stores and regulate this loop. And this will help you become a more higher performance athlete by decreasing your body fat percentage and subsequently increasing your muscle mass. And overall, your performance will be increased.